Would you like to know how to grow this great purple plant known as Zebrina? It's an easy one to grow, but you need to know 3 things. You need to know what it needs, give it what it wants, and get ready for it to grow. Come with me and I'll tell you all about it. This little purple jewel is surprisingly deceptive, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. So let me be really clear about what this plant needs. It's native to the coastal regions of Mexico and Guatemala. In this region, the temperatures range from 65 to about 85, and there's a wet season and a dry season. 6 months of rain and warm and humid air, and then 6 months of dry and cooler air. It grows in the shade of trees nearby streams and thrives in dappled sunlight. And that means that the sun is dappling through the leaves of the trees, and it's actually getting direct sunlight for 2 to 3 hours a day. So what this means for you in the growing environment is that it's going to have a season of vigorous growth where it's warm and it's moist and it's receiving a lot of nutrients. And then that's going to be followed by a dormant season where it slows down and the weather gets cooler and it requires a lot less attention, fewer nutrients, less water. And so that cycle of a wet season and a dry season is important for the health of this plant. It makes it a great indoor plant, but you'll need to put it in an east window so that it's getting the morning sun. And if you're growing it outside, you can put it in the shade of your trees where it's getting that dappled sunlight. But know that it can take 2 to 3 hours of direct sunlight. And that little bit of sunlight actually causes it to have a better color. It's a deeper purple, a richer green. If it has fuzz, there's even more fuzz with that sunlight, and it actually brings out the character in your plant. During that warm, wet season, you're going to be fertilizing it regularly with a slow release fertilizer or with a compost that you've added to the soil, but it prefers a rich, nutrient soil. If you've just bought your Tradescantia and it's in that overgrown basket with a whole lot of growth on it, be aware that that is a vigorous root system and it's going to need to be repotted fairly quickly. You want to get a pot that's about 2 inches bigger, which is a little bit bigger than you would choose for other plants, but it's because of that vigorous root system. You want to be able to check that regularly and provide plenty of growing room for the roots. The Zebrina is the native cultivar in Mexico, but there are many varieties of Tradescantia that have been developed over the years, and they all grow in a similar pattern. This is a vining ground cover, and what that means is that the plant creeps over the ground and it roots as it grows so that it spreads out very quickly and makes a dense ground cover. And it's a great plant in its native environment, and it grows really well with the plants that grow in the coastal regions of Mexico. But when you take it out of its native environment, it can become very problematic. In Hawaii and Australia and Brazil, this is actually categorized as an invasive plant. And what that means is that it spreads to the point that it takes up the growing space of other native plants. It actually takes over the area and squeezes out the growing space for native plants, and those native plants die in that area. So that is the reason why it's categorized as invasive. But in other parts of the world, it is simply aggressive. And that just means that it grows really easy and really fast, but it can be controlled in its growth. And so a plant that has these features of creeping and vining and rooting can make some really awesome houseplants. And in areas of the world with a colder climate, it makes a great outdoor plant during the spring, summer, and fall. During the past 20 years, plant lovers and botanists and even corporations have gone to a great deal of time and energy and money to develop different cultivars of the Tradescantia because it is such a unique plant with this gorgeous purple on the underside and all of these different stripes and patterns and fuzz that come along with those different cultivars, it's a great money-making industry. And the newer varieties of Tradescantia are patented. Now, this isn't something that's commonly reported to you, but when a plant is under patent, it is actually illegal to propagate it. Now, this white velvet Tradescantia got rained on last night, so it's hard to see the velvet feature in it. But if you look at the underside of the leaf here, and this particular leaf that got sheltered from the rain, you can actually see the white fuzz on this leaf. And this particular plant, the more sun it gets, the more fuzz it has. So it's a really interesting variety, and I use it in several containers in my landscape. Now, this is the Burgundy Tradescantia, and it's a great demonstration of what you usually find in the nurseries and plant stores. They usually have it in a hanging basket, and it has sort of this beehive shape of trailing stems and leaves. And when you find them in the store, they're truly spectacular because they're at the height of their growing season. But what we see with this one is a great example of what happens as they continue to grow, because it is a trailing vine, and this vine is going to get longer and longer, and occasionally it will branch, but most of the time it's just going to be vining and growing longer and longer. And so the plant is doing what it would normally do in the native environment. It's reaching out, looking for ground to put down roots. And when it is able to put down roots, then it has flush, beautiful growth coming up from each of those roots. But when it's in a hanging basket and it can't root, this long vine is getting all of its nutrients from a long way away from the end of the plant. And so the longer it gets, the sadder it looks. It gets to be long and leggy, not because it's reaching for the sun, but because it's getting very few nutrients from the pot because it's gotten so long in its growth. So this is something that you need to consider in terms of how do you manage your plant as it grows. So in terms of managing this long, leggy growth, it is very helpful to prune this plant when you see that happening. And the way you prune it is you go all the way back, and you see the farther up the stem I go, the fewer leaves it has, and the leaves are brown and dying. And that is exactly what happens when the runner gets to be too long. The leaves up at the top will fall off and die, and the leaves down at the bottom will be beautiful. And so this is past the point that it needs to be pruned. If you notice, this stem is already had some damage because it's been hanging off the edge of the pot. And so I'm actually going to cut this one back above that damage and take the whole thing off. Now this stem, I can see that it's healthy up at the top. So what I'm going to do is take it back to just below a leaf. I don't want to leave blank stem sticking out. I want to take it right below the leaf so that it's a clean cut, and I'm going to remove that part. So I'm just continuing the process, taking off the stems right below the leaf node. So I've removed 5 limbs. The plant looks much better without those long strands coming down, and I haven't taken off more than 1/3 of the plant, and it's going to be ready to go back to its little spot and continue growing just like it is. So now the frustrating part. I have all of these stems of Tradescantia that could root and grow new plants, and it is illegal for me to do that. So, compost. Yeah, that's frustrating. Zebrina is a different story. I can propagate that all I want to, but this Burgundy is under a patent, and I'm not going to do that. One thing I've learned in my adventures as a gardener is that there are some plants that I cannot make happy. Some plants love it in my yard, and some plants simply do not thrive. And that's going to be true for you too. And the green Tradescantia is one of the plants that I have not been able to make happy because I've moved it several times. I've changed the amount of water that I use on it, and it continues to have these ugly little dead leaves on it. And so this is not a plant I'm going to purchase again next year. This was my experiment with the albiflora this year, and I'm not going to get it again next year. In my landscape, Tradescantia is almost always used in container gardens, and I mix it in with other plants with different colored and different shaped leaves, and I find that I enjoy it a whole lot more in mixed container gardens than I do in gardens with just that plant in it. There's no doubt that Tradescantia is by far one of the easiest plants to propagate because of this vining nature and these little roots that come out at every little seam in the stem. And so with the Zebrina that's not under patent, we can propagate it. And what you want to do is have a fairly short stem, about 3 inches, and you want to cut it right below the node where the root is coming out. You don't want to damage the node, but you also don't want stem hanging out at the bottom. You want it right at the node so that the plant is ready to root right there. And then you want to remove these little bottom leaves so that you can put this part of the stem in the soil. Now what's happening here is that this stem is part of the circulatory system in the plant. And inside this stem are tiny little meristem cells that respond to damage. When the plant is stepped on or squashed or cut or damaged in any way, those little meristem cells activate and they can grow a root or a shoot or both. And so when you damage it and you cut it right below the node and you remove those leaves, this one is going to root and that one is going to root when I put it in the soil. And it's not going to take very long at all for it to do that. Now, if you've pruned your Zebrina and you have a lot of stems that you want to propagate, this is something I learned very quickly in the greenhouse. If you cut a stem and you're ready to propagate it, which end of the stem is the tip and which end of the stem goes toward the root? If you've cut it like this, there's no way to tell. So it's really easy to get it upside down in the pot. So anytime I have a stem like this and I can't tell which end is up, that one's going to the compost pile. I'm not going to waste time on it. So your stems, you want to pick the stems where it's easy to see where the tip is. And I can root several cuttings on a long stem. I can cut it here and take off the leaves, and it's ready to go in the soil. But I can also, since I know that this is the tip and this is where it roots, I can take another cutting and take off the leaves. And this root, because it is a vining plant, it can grow new roots all along that vine. So it doesn't matter where the vine comes off of the plant. As long as you know which end is up, you can easily propagate it. And it might take a couple of weeks, but as long as I keep this soil moist, those roots are going to grow. So I want to make this very clear about how to take your cutting. This one you can easily see that there are 3 roots already growing out of the seam where the leaf comes out of the plant. And whether there's a root there or not, the node is there, and you want to preserve the node. You want to cut very close to the seam without damaging the node or the roots that are coming out of the node. And where you take that cut, you want to remove that leaf, because this is the part of the stem that's going to go into the soil and begin to grow new roots for a new plant. Now, I have lots of friends that prefer to root in water, and Tradescantia does root easily in water, but it's important to know that the root that grows in the water is different from the root that grows in the soil. In the water, it's going to have a waxy finish on the outside that enables that stem to take up less moisture. But in the soil, that root has fine little hairs growing all over it to take advantage of every drop of moisture in the soil. So growing a plant root in water and then transferring it to the soil isn't very helpful in terms of getting that plant established. If you want it to be a plant that grows in the dirt, you need to root it in the dirt. If you have a question, drop a comment below, and if you enjoyed it, consider subscribing. Thanks for playing in the dirt with me, and I'll see you next time on The Handcrafted Garden.